Hello again, this is your beloved Dr. Jimmy. Yes, here to start part 5 of my Halloween Horror Nights history for Halloween Horror Nights 18, back in the year 2008, Reflections of Fear. Well, when I was last talking in the pardon my slightly disheveled look, although I might appear a little disheveled, please be aware that my mind is perfectly sheveled, if that even is a word, and everything will be all right. All right, where was I? Pardon me. Yes, in the previous video I was talking about the first of the houses I was going to talk about, body collectors' collections of the past, which was my personal favorite that year. Now, I had started talking a bit about the original Body Collector's house from 2005 and about the original source inspiration for the whole Body Collector's concept, which was an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the gentleman from the episode Hush, quite classic episode. So we won't go back over any of that. But the Body Collectors in 2005 are all a part of Terra Cruentus. And if you recall, in all the videos that I made back for Halloween Horror Nights 15, I cover that house quite thoroughly, I think. So, again, the Body Collectors then would process, kill people and take their bodies and cut them into nasty little bits and pieces and do a lot of dissecting and separating the organs and pieces apart for use in the Terror Blade rituals, etc., etc. Apparently they're really interested in this sort of thing even when they're not in Terra Cruentus. Somehow they're able to transport themselves through time and or space and get to various places in history where they have done horrible things under the cover of some natural disaster or war or group of serial killings, which were then blamed on somebody else. And that's a sort of the theme of Body Collectors, that the Jack the Ripper murders, Jack the Ripper murders, this is actually a letter opener, but it looked scary, were actually committed by these body collectors in London in the year 1888. That got me really hyped because I'm a little bit of a ripperologist. And when I discovered that, I started in real time, on the actual day that the actual murders occurred, because in 1888 was 120 years before 2008. And so on the actual dates in the autumn of 1888, when the murders and situations occurred, I put posts on the old vault about the Ripper murders and what had happened on those exact dates 120 years earlier on HHN Vault, on the thread about this house. And I enjoyed doing that throughout the event. Some people yelled at me because some of the pictures I posted of some of the photographs from there were a bit too extreme, apparently, although tamer than anything you'd see on television today, so I didn't think that was so much. But it was fun, because I got to show off a bit of my historical knowledge about the murders, which I love showing off stuff. Obviously, videos you're watching now. Bit of a pundit, you know, in the classical sense of the word. No, more of a pedant. Whatever. Anyway, getting past all of that, back to the house itself. It drew the idea. So it took place in London, 1888, during the Jack the Ripper thing. And the atmosphere reminded you a bit of old Jack the Ripper movies that you might have seen, and even newer ones like the From Hell that the Hughes brothers directed. African-American identical twin brothers in America making, in the late 20th century, early 21st century, making this old British Victorian thing in the 90s, and they're doing it very well. I think it's cool there's identical twin directors, but they made that with Johnny Depp, of course, and of course there was another Johnny Depp movie that had similar themes that got reference into the house as well, which I thought was cool. We'll get to that in a minute. So you go into the house itself, and the atmosphere, it had wonderful facade. It's like you see a London street right in front of you, just like in Whitechapel. Whitechapel, just to let you know, was outside of the city of London proper at that time. Whitechapel, Spitalfields was off on the east end of London. Well, you didn't talk about the East Enders, were the more working class. For a while, it was actually that area was where the French Huguenots lived when they escaped from France and the Catholics and St. Bartholomew's massacre and all of that. When the Catholics were killing the Huguenots, a lot of them went to England where it was safe to be a Protestant, and so they were living in that sort of area for a while. It's always been a slum for new immigrants in a way. Then they sort of left. Jews came in and moved in there for a while, and there are other areas near there that became Asian enclaves, like in Limehouse and other parts of that part of London. Eventually the Jews moved out. That's the whole thing of you have a slum immigrant community, and then they work hard and they start to do better and better, and once they reach after upward mobility, they move out to the suburbs or somewhere else, and then someone else moves in. So nowadays you have a lot of people, Muslims and people from Pakistan or from other parts of the Middle East moving into these areas in London. So, it constantly moves over and over. And maybe the old synagogue from way back, there goes a bobcat, from the 19th century becomes a mosque today. It gets reworked and changed. And was originally a Huguenot church back 100 years before that. So, and the same building gets changes hands. That sort of thing happens. So that's the kind of area we're talking about. It was always a lower class area. There was a large Jewish population at the time in the 1888. A lot of them were political radicals, and you're talking about these wild ideas like Karl Marx was doing, writing about in London. They're writing about crazy ideas of changing and anarchy. That kind of stuff was flying around through these areas. So you had a lot of exciting, wild things. Of course, you had a lot of prostitutes, you had a lot of crime, a lot of filth. All this stuff was going on in this tightly packed, powder keg area, waiting for something exciting to happen. And someone started murdering women. There's been all sorts of rumors and stories about who that could be. I don't want to get into all of that. There have been everything from a member of the royal family to the physician of the royal family to a crazy artist to whatever. Won't get into any of those. But this was all set up, and they captured that very well. When you went into the house, you have this London street with fog. There's a coach, and there's one of these ladies of the evening, very British, very pretty, sort of hello, the sort of classy prostitute. Street prostitutes, in London might be, hello, governor, rub your tummy, as opposed to, say, New York, where it's like, hey, you want some of this? Very different style. So it's sort of like that, very pretty, and you went through that. And then you go down an alleyway, and at the end of the alleyway is one of the body collectors with a top hat looking rather scary, floating in midair. You're like, oh God, just right out of Buffy. And it's kind of freaky, and you're kind of looking. It's actually a mannequin, but it looks really creepy as it floats along. And as you're distracted by that, from behind the alleyway corner comes another one with a knife, with a big sound effect. I remember this house pretty damn well. It was my favorite house that year, and I can remember each turn. You go through there, and it's really decorated beautifully. You have stuff that says Dorset Street, and some of the actual little streets in the alleys and things that you would go through. Mitre Square, all these little places that you would that are part of the Ripper story. And you go through these and little alleyways with all these advertisements for things, and then there's a great big barber shop front. Now the barber shop is not from Jack the Ripper; it's from Sweeney Todd. Okay, from Sweeney Todd. The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, which was a legend that predates the Rippers by a good 50 years. First printed in 1946 or 47, 1846, 1847, in a penny dreadful called The String of Pearls. Now, this legend is based on some urban legends that have been flying around London long before this, although there's some people who claim it was a real-life Sweeney Todd around 1800. We don't know that for a fact. There's no evidence of that. But there's been urban legends of meat pies that had more than mutton or lamb or pork in them, Even Charles Dickens, wrote something in one of his novels before this about, cannibalic pastries. You have to be careful what you eat. You might be getting, your buddy or maybe a kitten. Hopefully a kitten and not, their neighbor. And Bob didn't like that. So the story of Sweeney Todd was evolved from these sort of legends, and it became a penny dreadful, which is like a newspaper or a tabloid with all kinds of graphic stories, and you'd read that and get excited, and then it's like a chapter, so you have to get another chapter next week, and over a course of a year or so you would get that. Within a few months after this appeared in these press, the same year that the last chapter was published, there was already a stage play in England about the demon barber of Fleet Street. And there were dozens of these little plays based on the same story in those days. So this happened, and then in the early 20th century, they made a couple of silent films. There was a talkie film in the 30s, all done in England, and eventually the story came here to the United States. Andy Milligan made a really gory film in the 60s or 70s that was updating the story, but it was based on these legends. But you really don't know much about it. It still becomes obscure. It was in the early 70s. A man named Christopher Bond wrote a play about Sweeney Todd, and Stephen Sondheim just happened to be in London and saw it and said, "Oh, this will make a great musical." And he called Hal Prince up and said, "Let's make a musical." And he got a mystery writer, a British mystery writer named Wheeler, to write the book, and then he did the music, and they did the musical Sweeney Todd, and that's the rest is history. This became a huge hit. It won the Tony Award. It's been done over again in different parts. There's a revival that they had in London where they stripped down it to just a few actors who played instruments on stage while they were doing it, and then they had more recent, bigger revivals. And of course there was the movie, the Tim Burton movie with Johnny Depp. There I got to it. And Helena Bonham Carter and Alan Rickman and Timothy Spall from Harry Potter and all these other characters doing wonderful acting. Delightful gothic Tim Burton version. Not all the songs were there, but it popularized it. Now this came out Christmas 2007. So it was not a full year before the movie had come out when Halloween Horror Nights 2008 came out, and people who are into Halloween Horror Nights love this Tim Burton movies. And so when they made the house, they took the actual barbershop room with its slanting window and the mirror behind the barber chair right out of that movie and put it right into the house. When you walked in that room, if you'd seen the movie, you'd immediately recognize the room. This is the Sweeney Todd barbershop. And there's the chair right there. And there's the right next to you is the big chest where they stuffed the first body. And it's bouncing around. Oh, there's somebody dead in there. Now that distraction, you're distracted, allows the body collector's assistant, a horrible kind of troglodyte with a Hannibal Lecter muzzle and a straitjacket with flapping arms, comes out Rah! To scare you out of the thing. That's one of the scares that could happen in a room. Another scare, of course, is that the barber is one of the body collectors, smiling gladly, and he's got someone on the chair who's cutthroat and looks like he's dying, and then he pulls one of those levers. It doesn't send the body tumbling into the Mrs. Lovett's pie shop below. No, instead, big knives stick out of his chest, poking and stabbing and blood, and the blood comes spurting out in slow motion. Well, not really slow motion. It's really water, and it splashes on you and gets your glasses nasty, and you have to wipe them off, and then everything looks like ketchup. Well, no, everything's wet. And after that, you walk around the corner. Now, I couldn't help but notice some of the pictures here, pictures of women's faces. One of them, I swear to God, looks just like a picture of what was her name, Polly? One of the first victims of the Ripper murders, who was the post-mortem police photograph of her face as she was lying there dead. It looked like that. I don't know if that's the actual photo they used. If they did, bravo. I highly recommend that. Then you would go past a room where one of the collectors is busy sawing away on a human leg. The human attached to the leg is screaming, "Help me, help me!" It looks like he's actually cutting his leg off, because they very cleverly have his real leg hidden under the table and a dummy leg there, so it looks just like he's actually cutting it off. And now I've come to the end of this video. Next time we continue Body Collectors.